Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. There's been a lot of talk about the future of James Gunn's DCU. There are a lot of animated series he's also been working on. Now people are talking about an absolute Batman animated series. Batman the animated series, but make it absolute universe. This is also one of the reasons why you've started to see way more fan animations coming out for Absolute Batman and the other Absolute comics. They've all looked amazing. Like there's some amazing fans working on this stuff already. So we'll explain what's going on behind the scenes, especially with the Absolute Universe just in general, because that's a relatively brand new thing that's happening right now. So that's why people are talking about turning that into a new animated series or an anime series. Given all the chaos with all the new buyout talks with Warner Brothers and what's going to happen with the future of the DCU, it just feels like they need as many slam dunks as they could get, and this feels like it could be another big slam dunk. There are currently about 6 different animated series that James Gunn is working on behind the scenes right now. Some of them are a little further along than others, like some of them are confirmed and some of them they just started working on. So I'll explain what the current state is of DC animation. Some of them he talked about more specifically when I had my chat with him a couple weeks ago, so I'll explain what he said about those too. Mostly those were Creature Commandos Season 2 because that's his series, like he created that series before he was hired at DC to become their Kevin Feige, and then just continuing it as he's there doing that. Then there's the Mr. Miracle Season 1, which is going to be a New God series based on Tom King's Mr. Miracle series. Then there's a bunch of Elseworlds series that you already know about, like My Adventures with Superman Season 3. They're still continuing with that. There's a Starfire series that they're making. I think that's meant to be Elseworlds. My Adventures with Green Lantern. It's going to be Jessica Cruz as a teenager. There's Batman Caped Crusader Season 2, which is also Elseworlds, more of like a 1940s vibe of classic comic adaptation. Bruce Timm of the original Batman the Animated Series is working on that with Matt Reeves. In another Batman animated series, but it's called Bat Fam, and it's a spin-off of Merry Little Batman, so it's like this own separate, completely different thing, not meant to be canon to the DCU. So there's already a lot of animated Batman series stuff happening on TV. The reason why you started to hear about them adapting Absolute Batman in the Absolute Universe into an Elseworlds animated series or an anime series is because the creators, Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta, actually started talking about it, having an anime studio start to develop it. If you've not been reading any of the Absolute comics so far, they go so hard, they've actually been so amazing and gotten so many new people to buy and read comics, it just seems like a natural extension to adapt it into animation, like it's just born for an adult animated series or a hardcore anime series.
There's certain things that it would be fun to examine there.
Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta are the writer and artist doing Absolute Batman specifically. Now, there are a number of Absolute titles right now, like Absolute Wonder Woman, Absolute Superman. They're going to be doing more Absolute Flash. Basically, for all the other major characters, they just did a version of Absolute Justice League called Absolute Evil. We'll explain that in a second. But it's meant to be a relatively brand new thing, so it's just getting started. Scott Snyder's been boosting fan posts trying to get steam behind the idea of an anime or adult animation series, realizing that people inside DC probably are already thinking about doing the same thing like that. This is still very early days, so a lot of fans probably aren't aware of what's happening behind the scenes. Typically, Warner Brothers and DC only announce their brand new animated series when contracts have been signed, animators have been hired, and have actually started working on actual episodes. James Gunn has also teased a couple of upcoming projects that they haven't started yet, but I think he's tried to pull back on announcing too much stuff because a lot of it might wind up getting canceled in future years if development stalls out, which he did talk to me about a little bit. Like, not everything that they're developing is going to eventually get made. Basically, the idea is they just want to release the bangers, so like if something doesn't look like it's going to work out, they're not going to force it out the door. So at least on a PR level, it just makes sense not to announce every single idea that comes into his head until it actually turns into a contract that gets signed and people start working on it. So given all the things that James Gunn has said about live action Batman Brave and the Bold and the new DCU Batman, yes, I definitely think that he has talked to people about doing Absolute Batman in animation. One of the reasons why you hear anime referenced so specifically, not just straight up animated series, is because anime and manga has started to overtake traditional Western media in terms of sales. If you look at like a recent New York Times bestseller list, anime manga is outselling traditional comics, traditional stuff by orders of magnitude. Kind of only seems like Batman here has a chance of standing up against some of the new popular manga that's coming out. So because that art form is becoming so much more prevalent, more popular around the world, it just makes more sense that you see more stuff adapted to that style. To get more specific though, Nick Dragotta, the artist working on the title, recently did a Q&A talking more about doing it as an anime series done by Studio Trigger. They just did Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which is a good example of a Western type of video game story turned into an anime, like something that wasn't anime to begin with that was then adapted into an anime. Which is basically what they'd have to do with the Absolute Universe, just in general, like Absolute Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Justice League, just the entire universe. If you don't watch anime or you're not familiar with Studio Trigger, they're actually known for doing a lot of really weird, really quality stuff. Like they worked on Star Wars Visions. Most anime fans probably remember them from one of their classic titles like Kill La Kill or Delicious in Dungeon more recently. All very, very solid series. They're mostly known for doing really, really cool stuff, but one of the issues on a practical production level is that typically they usually just work on one season of something, and then if they come back to it, it's like many years later. So if they were to do an Absolute Batman anime series, yes, it would go so hard, it would probably be amazing, but then you probably wouldn't see a season 2 for like 4 years. Mostly, I think people just don't want to see them Marvelize it with a lot of their recent animation. Like, there have been a couple exceptions to this, but a lot of Marvel's animation has fallen back to that what-if style of animation they started doing during Phase 4. I have not been a fan of that. Probably one of the best examples, though, of new Marvel animated series is X-Men 97, which is still based on the What If series, but they put a patina on top of it to make it look more like the original X-Men animated series. So it's still Western animation, but inspired by anime. Most likely what would happen with Absolute Batman is they would still have a Western studio or a Western group of people actually working on it. X-Men 97 would probably be the best example of what that might look like. One of the reasons why you don't see a lot of these Western studios, like not just DC, but Marvel, other like really, really big studios doing more anime, hardcore types of projects, more adult-oriented animation projects, is mostly because they're terrified of Western audiences not digging it, and particularly younger audiences, which I think Marvel incorrectly assumes are their only audience for animation, which is why you don't see them doing a lot of animation. Like, there's just way less profits in animation just in general than there is in live action, even though some of the more recent bangers in movie theaters, like big movies, are animated movies. One of the best examples of that more recently is the Demon Slayer movie, which adapts their most recent arc, which, if you haven't watched the previous arcs, is very confusing, but still earned hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Neza 2 earned over $2 billion more recently as well, so like animated series can actually do very well when they're done correctly. Personally, I felt like all of my X-Men 97 Season 1 episode videos performed very well. There was a solid audience for the series there, and overwhelmingly the majority of the people that watched those videos, because I have some analytics that actually break it down, were older millennials who grew up watching the original series when it first aired back in the 90s. So young adults, middle-aged people became the primary audience for that animation, so it would totally work for Absolute Batman, the absolute universe of comics.
Apocalypse. Gotta get the X-Men back to the 90s.
One of the funnier, ironic things about this, too, is that back when the original Batman the Animated Series was being created by Bruce Timm, all of the animators who worked on those episodes said that during the 90s, like back in the day, one of the biggest notes that they would get from him day to day was that the work they were doing was too anime. As in, the animators on that series back in the 90s were huge anime fans. So remember, this is in the 90s. Just imagine having slightly darker tones than the original Batman the Animated Series. That original series didn't pull its punches back in the 90s. I watched it as a child and was not traumatized too much. Like, there were some moments that definitely went hard, but it wasn't really that crazy. As far as I know, even though censorship rules have gotten very strict in present day, I don't think they've ever had to censor anything from the original Batman the Animated Series. Explaining the basic premise of the absolute universe of storyline, the overarching story. So it's meant to be an Elseworlds universe. It's called Elseworld, but in context, it's the absolute universe. It all starts with Darkseid. He tries to absorb the power of the Spectre, making him more god-tier powerful than he already is. He's prevented from doing that, but during the process of trying to stop him and saving the Spectre, Superman, the other characters learn that Darkseid is something like a Nexus being, to make more Marvel references. He's meant to be a multiversal force of nature who exists in the same form in every universe across the multiverse, with all of them linked together with one exception. So the reason why the Justice League characters are experiencing Darkseid in a different way in the main DC universe is like a regular villain that they would fight, like a very powerful but regular villain. was all because the main DC universe had been cut off from the rest of the multiverse, so Darkseid had been cut off from his true power in all the other versions of himself from the multiverse, weakening him. He realizes this, then allows the heroes to kill him so he can tap into his true power, so his essence gets pulled to the absolute universe where it begins to pervert it. Once he's there, he incubates his power to gain access to his true multiversal power, and because he's so evil, so cosmic, it becomes this overriding influence perverting reality. That absolute Earth becomes a dark shade of the main DC universe version of Earth where evil reigns supreme. There's something called moral gravity that pulls all good things down and lifts all evil up, metaphorically. So it's sort of an inversion of alignment.
Ready the Armada. We will use the old ways.
When the Justice League forms in the Absolute Universe, it's made up of all the major villains like Joker, Eleanor Thawne, who's a female version of Eobard Thawne Reverse Flash, Hector Hammond, Ra's al Ghul, Veronica Cale, who's a Wonder Woman villain, Lex Luthor, also out living his best corn-fed life growing crops in the Heartland, Clark Kent style, and he has a full head of hair again. So it's a major story twist inversion on a lot of classic DC characters and tales. And even though this sounds like an absolute banger of an idea, the reason why you haven't heard about James Gunn saying, yes, we're doing Absolute Batman as an animated series is because it just started. There's only about enough material to get through about 12 episodes. So they just need to wait a little bit longer before they actually start so they don't catch up or overlap with the original comic book material so they don't run into a Game of Thrones situation. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below. What do you want to see from an animated Absolute Universe? Just remember though, if they do start working on it, it takes them about 3 to 4 years to actually get a brand new animated series out from start to finish. I'll start doing more videos for this as they make more announcements, so everybody just post all your video requests in the comments below. But big reminder, Predator Badlands just came out. Click here for my video for the ending, the end credits, and what's happening with the sequels. And click here to learn what's going on with the new live-action Batman. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.